bunnies are actually fantastic pets, but a lot more complicated than I thought back then when I said, yes, we can have bunnies. And then I learned that you have
It seems easier. It seems, I mean, it's smaller than a dog, right? It doesn't need to be walked, as far as I know. Like, what could go wrong?
Exactly. Well, apparently a lot.
Hello and welcome to the Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast. I'm your host, Dave Baumeister, and with me today is my good friend about 4 hours east of here, Eva Hoffmann. Eva is a teacher of, among other subjects, philosophy and ethics, but also German, history, and English, I believe, at a Gymnasium in Bayreuth, which is a city in northern Bavaria, or in Franken here in Germany. Eva and I talk about philosophy and its role in community and in education, what it means to study philosophy as a high school age student and what her experience was with that and now as a teacher and what value that may or may not have in a broader context. We talk about matters of post-academic and para-academic existence. We talk about family life. We talk about the human-animal boundary and how that connects with death and life and holding small, cuddly creatures in your hands that are warm and then navigating the aftermath of the death of those same creatures. So there's a lot here to sink your teeth into here with Eva Hoffmann on the Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast. Eva, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me, David.
Yes. Yeah. We have a lot in common. I mean, we were born on different continents, but we have a lot in common in terms of that we've lived the expat life. We've both returned home to our cities of origin at different life stages. We have bilingual children and are in kind of mixed nationality families. We also intellectually and in terms of our what we did in our doctoral work. You worked in German studies and I worked in philosophy, but we had a lot of overlap there. I would love just to hear there's so much that we could talk about, but let's start with this. Like, give us a nutshell introduction to who you are, like where you live, what you're doing with your life, and what you've done with your life up to this point.
Okay. All right. Well, it's funny that you mentioned that I'm back in my hometown because maybe I start there. Yes, I did return to Bayreuth, Germany, and I'm sitting right now in my apartment, only 5 minutes away, I think, from where my grandmother was born and where she lived most of her life with my mom. And that's just something I've never quite expected, that I would be back in Bayreuth. And before that, well, like you mentioned, I lived in the US for, I think, 11 or 12 years and did my PhD in German studies there. I moved away when I was 18 and I really, really, really wanted to get out of here, even though I enjoyed being a teenager here. I think we had a good time. And
but it was time. It was time to leave the nest.
Totally time, exactly. I was just really excited to see more of the world, and then studied philosophy in Freiburg and went to upstate New York for 2 years to work as a language assistant for a small liberal arts college there, and then had the opportunity to go to Eugene, Oregon, and did my PhD there, and did that for 6 years, I think. And that's when we met. And after that, I had another 3 years in Walla Walla, Washington, as an assistant professor of German studies and gender studies, which was also really, really fun, actually. And then in between Oregon and Washington, we had our child. She was born in 2017. And I think that changed a lot.
Yes. Yeah.
And it also
a baby changes everything, they say. Yeah.
Exactly. And it also changed how I felt about, I guess, being far away from my family, being in the US. And so a lot of things kind of converged around 2020. It was Corona. It was the first Trump presidency. It was our child was 3 years old. And my brother, actually, at that point, he had cancer, and it was not clear. It was pretty bad. So we didn't know what would happen. He's now healthy and well, but back then it was really a moment where we didn't know how he would be doing. And so there was this one moment around Christmas in 2019, I guess. I had traveled back to Germany to see my brother in the hospital, and I had our daughter with us, and I'd flown home, and it was just a really long flight, and then things didn't work out in Seattle at the airport, and I ended up waiting for hours in the middle of the night with a toddler for my partner to pick me up. And I was just, there was this moment where I realized I can't do this anymore. I don't have the energy to, something needs to change.
Okay,
right?
That was like the breaking point, or the proverbial straw that broke the camel's back.
It was a little bit, yes. And I think I've always felt increasingly guilty or wrong about doing all these cross-country, cross-world flights on a regular basis to see my family. And I just didn't feel like it was the lifestyle I wanted. So all these things came together, and then Corona came, and we made the decision to come back. Well, for me to come back, for my partner, it was completely new to come to Germany. And that was 5 years ago. And with that came a career change. And I decided to do my teacher's training. And now I've been working for, 2 years, 1.5 years now as a high school teacher in my hometown, which is probably my 18-year-old self would have not wanted that for me. But I actually really like it. And I'm quite happy here now.
Okay. But you don't teach at the same school where you went yourself as a student?
No.
Okay. That would be too weird, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Nice. Yeah. And talk about, like, that's also something that I'm navigating, and that other people I've talked to on this series are navigating, is like a post-academic transition. So, and your case is really interesting to me, because me in moving to Germany meant, kind of renouncing full-time academic work and put my academic career into jeopardy, and the sustainability of it. So questioning, thinking about, well, how can one still do, in my case, philosophy, or, like some sort of work that's connected to what I care about here in Germany, and what would that look like? And in your case, I'm very actually envious of people who are teachers. I know you don't only teach philosophy, but you do teach philosophy and ethics. You also teach German, right? And do you also teach English?
Yeah. Not anymore. I used to, but not.
So like, that's something that's just, as a model and as an American, where philosophy doesn't appear in, high school, in this case, Gymnasium, or like curricula at all, or if it does, it's very rarefied and kind of exceptional. It just, generally speaking, high school students in the US don't have any explicit exposure to philosophy or ethics. But in Germany, in this peculiar way, at least in certain German states, they do. So could you just like tell us about your teaching overall, and maybe about how philosophy or ethics in particular appear there for you, and what that means for you as, especially as a post-academic?
Right. Well, it's funny that you say that, because it's obvious, but I've never quite made the connection that there's a continuity from my work as an academic and now what I'm teaching in high school. But I love being an ethics and philosophy teacher, but it reminds me more of when I was a high school and I took ethics and philosophy as a student. I have a lot of what I'm teaching now reminds me of the time back then, and not of what I did in the PhD, because it's so different in a ways, right? The PhD and the academic work was a lot more academic, even though I'm teaching seniors here and in philosophy, and it gets quite, it gets quite into depth with the students because they're older and more advanced, but it's still, it's still very broad, and you don't get into a niche, which is what you do in academia, right? You really sort of get really, really detailed and deep into a very certain topic, and teaching philosophy is more giving them a broader overview, and then of like the different philosophers from like ancient Greece to today. Sort of, we walk through that in 2 years of them being seniors in high school. And so we don't really get into much depth, but of course the conversations are really, are really important, and the students like them a lot. So we always try to think about how what we do in philosophy and what we learn about the theory connects to their lives and to the world they live in. And that's what they really want from the classroom. And I think that's, for me, a very interesting part of it too. And so the way it works in Germany is, or in Bavaria, we teach ethics from in high school from grade 5 till 10. And then with 11, 12, and 13th grade, it's called philosophy. And then it's really the theory, like philosophy, like the different philosophers and their theories. But before that, in ethics, we do less philosophy. We do more of nonviolent communication, for example, and we talk about like friendship. A big topic is love and sexuality, and navigate your own feelings. And so that's what we do with the little ones.
No, that sounds super valuable. Like conversations just about kind of how they feel, what's right and wrong, what seems like what's the right thing to do in various contexts. Like that's where the rubber hits the road. It's cool that is actually introduced. And maybe, and for the younger ones, that is more of a point of access. That it just makes me think, because I do this, or like a philosophical puppet show, I'm like party clown philosophy guy here. And part of that is trying to engage with like 3, 4, 5, 6-year-olds around these things. But I think there's always a way to connect it to their real lives. And that's a virtue, I think. So.
Yeah. And we do a little bit of philosophy with the younger kids too. Like when we talk about friendship and we learn about friendship, we read a small text by Aristotle on friendship, and
that's more than many university students do. So it's like that's
yeah. So it's almost two different subjects, ethics and then philosophy. And I really enjoy both. And I'm really always trying to make sure with my school administration that I get to also teach the little ones and not just the older ones. And because I really love both. It's so different, but I like both. And like you said, I think it's so valuable to have a subject in school where we together learn about, okay, how can we name our feelings? What do we feel right now? What do we need? What do we want? How can we communicate that to others without being hurtful? Or how can we navigate the arguments and conflicts in a way that have a good outcome? And it's something that we should all learn with our families, but many of us don't. And I think it's really, really good to have a space where we do that. For sure.
Yeah. And it's, it's different than like civics, like in the US. I mean, there's a lot of debates about like, let's say like high school curriculum, which is like Germany and the US have something in common whereby most education policy is delegated to the states. So in Germany, they say Bildungssache is Ländersache. So each of there's 16 states. Am I wrong about this? Or the 16 German states each have their own educational policy. And in the US, each of the 50 states has its own educational policy. There is some federal oversight, but it does mean that there's like diversity of different ways that these things are treated. But my point there was just that ethics being carved out as its own special thing identified that this is like universally valuable for kids to think about. That's special. And I think the US could learn something from that, just having, these basic social skills. Where do they come from? Like consideration of others. I don't know. Maybe but let me ask you this, like just structurally, are these courses, the ethics and then the philosophy, are they optional for all students, or like who takes these?
So they are not optional. They are basically, they take place at the same time as religion studies takes place. And we're here in Bavaria, so it's a pretty conservative state, and we still have Catholic and Protestant religious studies for the students from grade on towards the high school graduation. And at the same time, as an alternative, we offer ethics. And when I was a student, I was one of the very few students who picked ethics because I was just more interested in that. And I had to go to a different school actually because my school just didn't have enough students. So for that time period during the day, in the morning, I would have to go to a school close by and be taught with the kids there. And so we still have a fair amount of students who just are not interested in religious studies because they didn't grow up in a religious way. They don't identify with the values. But then we also have a lot of students who are just non-Christians, and for them, that it's actually mandatory to go into the ethics class. They don't have the option to pick religious studies because it's only Catholic, it's only Christian religious studies that we offer.
Okay.
At least,
and in a way that it's almost kind of implied that you are either Protestant or Catholic yourself, right? So like how those courses are taught is it's kind of like, this is your part of your identity as a evangelical or evangelisch Christian, right? Or so if you do not identify with one of those groups, like either that, kind of your family's religion isn't counted as such, or in your case, like when you were younger, if the child, the student themselves decides that they want to think differently, right? Because you could have done one of the tracks, right, I assume, right? But so then this other option is provided, and I mean it's interesting just to think about that as a pretty unique model. But you say it's not very deep, but if you look at it, 5-6 years of background in philosophy that's always taught every year throughout, if you consider ethics in this broad sense, and then 3 years of philosophy in the name of philosophy and kind of learning about historical philosophers and ideas, that's more than many graduate students in philosophy get, just some exposure to that at least. I think what graduate school and professional philosophy does is it just basically takes that and then adds a bunch of secondary literature on top. And people then get in the weeds about all that and fight each other about that. And that produces its own style. And people, this is like maybe a more cynical view, but academic philosophers, they just care a lot more about where they're positioned in the secondary literature vis-a-vis other current academics. And they're not really thinking at the level of what do these different thinkers think? What's the big picture here? And that is actually done better in my view in a maybe for high schoolers, if you leave out these arcane scholarly debates that are the bread and butter of most academic philosophy. Most professional philosophers, what they're reading and writing is inaccessible to those high schoolers because it's inundated with all this secondary stuff. It kind of so in other words, like, do you feel like you still get to the point with those kids? Like, is this really philosophy in a genuine form?
I think so. Absolutely. I mean, like one of the first things we do during the 2 years of senior high school is after we introduce the basic terms, what's ethics and what is moral and what is a norm and all these categories. Then we get into the two different schools of philosophy, utilitarianism versus Kant, and we look at different dilemmas, and they have to basically decide, or they have to argue, well, what would Kant and the categorical imperative, how would a person that belongs to that school of thought what kind of decision would they make versus someone who thinks more in a utilitarianistic way? And so they really learn to look at difficult decisions from different standpoints, and they learn to argue, well, first of all, think in an ethical way, right? And informed by philosophers, and base their decision in an ethical way. And I think that's really important. And that really impresses them. And they have very long and deep arguments and discussions about that. So these dilemmas always work really well. It's an important method in teaching philosophy. And so what would you do in a difficult life decision where you maybe also decide for others, and it's a decision about life and death? And then how can you use these other philosophies and philosophers and their way of making decisions to inform your own decision? And I think that's really, really great. And I love how really the question is always, well, is that ethical? You know, is that something we want to do? And who are we hurting with this decision, and how much? And can this be justified because we're helping someone else? And I think it's just really important to have that kind of thinking. And otherwise, I don't know how much we do that, right? In school, how much we learn that, maybe in literature sometimes, but not in many other subjects. But it's so much something you have to think about in your life, right? So, and yeah, and it's always informed by, so I think it's real philosophy.
Eva, I want to ask you about the bunny. So will you tell us fill us in on what's happened with the bunny, and we'll build out from there.
Okay. Well, our daughter, she's now 7 years old, and she's really been wanting a dog. And we felt like a dog is we used to have a dog, but our lives are different now. And we felt like a dog is a lot of responsibility that we're not sure we can do well right now. And so we just started to think about other pets, and the option of a bunny came up. And bunnies are actually fantastic pets, but a lot more complicated than I thought back then when I said, yes, we can have bunnies. And then I learned that you have
It seems easier. It seems, I mean, it's smaller than a dog,
yes.
Right? It doesn't need to be walked, as far as I know. Like, what could go wrong?
Exactly. Well, apparently a lot, because they're quite complicated with their food. They need to eat a lot. They actually need to eat constantly. And as the more I read about bunnies and preparing for getting our bunnies, the more I learned about what they need to eat. And ideally, you don't give them any store-bought food, none of those pellets for bunnies, but you give them fresh food. And they eat a lot of that. So for the past couple of weeks, we've had them now 2 months, or 3 months almost. I've been going to the store every other day to buy huge amounts of salad and fresh herbs for those bunnies.
Man, okay. So you get them like kind of top shelf good veggies, right? You can't just, here's some potato skins. No,
they get fresh organic salad. Anyway, so I spent quite a lot of effort into feeding them, and they got our whole balcony to free roamly day and night. And
would you guys make yourselves a salad out of the same greens too while you're at it? It's like you got all these greens, like you're just gonna have a little salad yourself, or do you just give them all the greens?
Well,
like,
it's actually
shovel it out there.
Actually, we eat what they don't like to eat now.
Because you get their scraps.
Exactly. Yeah. Okay. They don't like spinach, it turned out. So we had to eat their spinach that they refused to eat. Anyway, so we got these beautiful two black and tan bunnies, sisters, and we named them Pom Pom and Paula, and they were just adorable and really, really nice. And they've lived on our balcony for the last 2.5 months, and it was just a joy. And then suddenly I came home one day, and one of them, Paula, was really cold and almost paralyzed. She was just laying on the floor, and we rushed to the emergency vet immediately. And they did some x-rays, and ironically, it turned out that that there was something wrong with her belly, and that she must have eaten something that was not good for her. Or it turned out it's actually a quite common disease for bunnies, because their whole intestines is so complicated, and they can't burp and they can't throw up. And if they eat something wrong or too much, it starts to ferment in their belly, and it doesn't move on to their intestines, and they die within 12 hours. And that's
what happened.
Yeah, she died the same evening, actually, at the vet. They did an intravenous they gave her some liquid through an IV. It was quite intense what we tried to do to
with like a real little needle.
Yes.
Stuff. Yeah.
Yes. And we kept her warm because she was already quite cold when we found her. And I think it was just bad luck because on other days I'm home more often, but that particular day we were all gone for 10 hours. And otherwise we would have just before, but we didn't. And she was dead within a few hours. And it was very, very sad and a little ironic because I was so determined to do everything right with the food. And I don't think we did anything wrong. The vet said one option. Sometimes it happens they get fur in their belly, hair.
And unlike a cat, they can't spit out a fur ball. That's weird that they can't burp. I wonder, it's like, I don't know. Thanks. I mean, Mother Nature ought to have allowed them to, you think, I don't know.
No, this is very unfortunate. And apparently, and I don't know, since we've had these bunnies, whoever I talk to, they're like, yeah, bunnies are complicated. They're harder than having a dog. So I wish we had just gotten the dog, but I do like them a lot. And,
And so Pom Pom is still there.
She's
the
still
other bunny.
there.
She's the sister. So how has Pom Pom handled the passing of Paula?
You can really tell that she's not happy, and her behavior has changed quite a lot. She was always the cheekier one of the two of them, and a little bit more daring, and now she's really shy and has lost a lot of her spunk. So we're looking for another bunny right now and visiting the animal shelters and scanning online offers to find her a good partner. She needs it. And
so you're committing. You remain committed to the bunny life, even despite the experience. Like, or are you guys tempted in some way? Well, maybe we can find a new home for Pom Pom. Kind of start over, get that dog after all. Like, this was a good experiment, but
I think it would break our daughter's heart. But also, I got really attached to them, and we spent months remodeling our balcony so they would be the perfect bunny territory. So we put quite a lot of effort into it, and I really like Pom Pom. I want her to stick around and hopefully have a long life with us, but she does need a second bunny out there.
Yes. So bunnies are social creatures in that regard. I mean, I guess, especially if you grow up with your sister, right? I mean, that's like
I think they can also get quite harsh with each other and dominating each other. But there was another thing that I just really loved. And we talked about politics earlier, and just watching these two bunnies being extremely peaceful and kind to each other and doing everything together. Like, they ate at the whole time, they slept at the whole time, cuddling with each other. They were just so affectionate with each other, and that gave me so much peace that that there was also, I was sad about losing Paula, or Bunny, but I was also sad about losing the two of them as a unit, right? And that really gave me a lot of comfort, and it made me so happy to just arrange this perfect bowl of beautiful food for them and put it out there and see them eat it. It was just really, really, really good. So you get a lot back from the bunnies too.
Yes, no kidding. I want to stay with the bunnies, but push into like just a little other corner, because I know back in your your doctoral dissertation and your academic research, which I know is is a bit on the back burner at the moment, but nonetheless, like, one of the themes that you often treated, and is something that we share a deep interest in, is the human-animal relationship. And that includes all, literal relationships with companion animals like bunnies and dogs, as well as the clothes we eat, the food we eat, how we think about humans and wild spaces, our own animality. But like, do you still think about any of those things, or it's like, what do you think about like living with these bunnies? Has that impacted your view of the world in a way? And maybe other ways you can address that, as like, is this ethical or not? Should you actually be living with these bunnies? It seems that there's some genuine communication going on there. At least they're very meaningful for you. Do you think that they lead good lives there, or are the benefits only unidirectional? Like reflect on that a little bit more abstractly, if you'd like.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the questions we've had when we started thinking about having bunnies was, where would we get them from? And it was really important to us that there's some kind of aspect in that whole issue of getting bunnies that we would provide a better life for bunnies that otherwise would have probably been slaughtered. So the bunnies we got they were raised by a breeder, but it was clear that they would eventually be meat. And so I think that was
like a local breeder in the Bayreuth area, or
a local breeder. And my partner had a colleague who organizes these shows, and we went to a bunny show, which is a really bizarre event to be at. But anyway, so that was an aspect. And then I learned a lot. I've never wanted an animal that lives in a cage. And I learned, and that's why I was so against having any animals other than a dog, really, or a cat maybe. And then I learned that bunnies are now basically, that it has changed a lot how we hold bunnies in our house, and they're more like cats now. They get to run around freely, and they use a cat toilet, and that just really appealed to me. I'm allergic to cats, so it's like, oh, that's awesome. I can have a cat that is not a cat, and I'm not allergic to it. And so,
yes, but it's just as good for petting, if not better, right? I mean, the tail is pretty short, but it's got that big long fur, the puffy fur.
And so we read a lot about how to really provide a good environment and how much space they need and what kind of food. So I think they're actually doing well. Before we had them, they were sitting in a little cage as the local breeders, the farmers do, right? They don't give them space to run around. And with us, they have 8 square meters between the two of them, and they get to run around. So I think they have a good life. Yes, absolutely. And, yeah, so that's a good feeling. And it's funny that you mentioned the research, because also part of the ethics classes, we also teach about our relationship to animals and the environment. And a huge topic in the 8th grade is philosophy and animals, more from an ethical standpoint. How should we, treat our animals, both the ones we eat and the ones we have as pets. So this is where I feel like maybe I can most connect to my former life as an academic in that regard. But I haven't had 8th graders in a while and as a teacher, so I didn't get the opportunity much so far. I haven't had it yet that much, but that's where I feel strongly reminded of my past life as an academic.
Yes. Yeah. Even if it reverberates on more like of a personal decisional level in your life now as well. So, okay, I want to stick with the bunnies, but here and twist in a different direction, which is with regards to death. So the bunny died. May I ask, like, what did you guys have, like a ritual, or like, what's your view around like the death of this is like a named bunny in your house, like a pet.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You have your 7-year-old kid, you've got, you're all very connected to this creature. Like how did you kind of mark its death? What sort, if at all, and what did that kind of look like for you?
I'm glad you asked, because we're sort of still thinking about and talking about that as a family. So first of all, it was really intense for me because I've never been present as someone passing away. And in that case, I was. She was there at the vet. She was lying on that table. And the vet said to me, I don't think you can take her home for the night. She is basically, she's not going to make the night. We have to let her go. And she recommended that she would put her down. And she started
with like a shot, kind of like a euthanasia.
Right. And she started to prepare the injection. And then she looked at me and she looked at the bunny and she said, I don't think I need to do this anymore. And she literally passed away that moment. And I was there petting her, and I could that was her last breath she took. And I was there, and she died, and I saw her dying. And it was just it was so sad to me because I felt like this little being that was completely dependent on me and I was responsible for her, and she passed. It was really like, it was really, really hard to let her go. And we picked her up in a little box and I took her home with me. And then of course I had to tell my daughter, and she was
so
happy.
she didn't yet know about you kind of went through this on your own as parents.
Right.
And like you in particular right there in the room kind of, and then took the brunt of that, the blow of it, as it were.
And then we had a rough night. My daughter cried a lot. She was very, very sad, got up the next day, cried. And then she was kind of over it. And she said, I'm just, she just doesn't want to think about it really, which I don't think is necessarily the best response, but also something that's very understandable. And she just literally says, well, I just don't want to imagine her as dead, right? I just don't think about her. So, but my partner and I buried her in our communal garden.
Okay, I was going to ask if like the box was still there. Like, I was like,
no.
Is that in the freezer, as we're speaking right now? Or so, okay, so buried her like in a little, do you use the box as like a little casket, or did you just bury her in the soil?
No, we had the box. No, actually, we did take away the box. We talked about it, and then we took away the box, and she's having a little grave in our communal garden. And my partner has prepared a song he would like to sing for all of us going there and sing and saying goodbye. But our daughter doesn't want to, right? She wants nothing to do with that. So
really? Okay. Like the idea of the pet cemetery. I mean, she could craft like a little headstone, like a little cross or something if she'd like, paint it and whatnot.
That's what we told her. And that seems to interest her a little bit. But overall, she's just very, and we've been telling her, that she's up in the skies. And she's like, no, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in God. I don't believe in her being up in the sky. And I don't.
Okay. So she's not. So then you guys, okay.
No,
so she wants it. She wants it straight,
right? And her way of dealing is, I don't want to talk about it. Stop talking about it. She's not in heaven. She's dead, but leave me alone with it, right?
Don't, in the ground.
Yeah. So we don't know what to do, and I think eventually we'll find a way of getting together at the grave and saying goodbye, but she's not ready yet, I think, our daughter.
Okay. Well, that's okay. The grave, I mean, unless it's like, hopefully it's not like in the vegetable garden part of the garden where someone who might like try to put a turnip there or something. If it's like already marked.
It's not, but also we prefer not to tell our fellow gardeners.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, I mean, it's some good extra fertilizer. It benefits everybody as well, like the circle of life.
Exactly. Right. Yeah.
So,
but it's ironic because our daughter really, she said to us, I want a pet that can die, right? Because she's already experienced the death of our dog and my parents' dog. And I was like, great, bunnies, they're supposed to live 10 to 15 years. And I'm going to do everything right with what they eat and how much space they have. So these will be, they will live long. And then, well, and then that.
There it goes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe you should try an iguana next. I had an iguana growing up, and I know I couldn't keep it myself for very long because it would always whip me when I would try to go into its enclosure. And I couldn't pick. I was like too weak to pick it up and afraid, so my mom had to pull it out to clean when I cleaned the cage and things. So eventually, it whipped me so much that I was so frightened of it that we gave it to my older sister who had moved out of the house by that point. And then she had it for a number of years. And then they gave it to somebody else. And I believe that iguana might still be alive, or it's like last time I checked, like somebody still had it. It was like in its 20s or something. It was huge. Wow. Okay. So, but I mean, I guess there's a certain point that it's that kind of experience of death is inevitable. Have you guys ever considered like an electronic pet? Like one of those like for reals or something, or like, there's probably some AI dogs coming down the line that will never die.
And we saw like basically a robot dog in Berlin at the main station, which looked really freaky. It moved like a big spider or something, but it was supposed to be like a little dog, and it was a robot. So yeah, we all agreed looking at that dog that's creepy, and it's not.
Okay, that's not for you guys.
I did say that because I really do think there's something about these bunnies being so soft and so alive that was really, really that gave a lot of joy to all of us, and because they're alive, right? And
yeah,
one of them still is, but when they were both still alive, that was just part of a lot of the joy, was to see them being so alive and eating and playing and sleeping, and yeah.
Okay. Well, it sounds like you're on track to being back up there with that when the second bunny is back in the mix, and assuming Pom Pom's not too hyper dominant of the new bunny on the scene and they get along well. That there's not another death right around the corner with one of them.
Not.
So. Well, let me pivot from this to, this is like the last substantive question that I have for you. And I've been asking many of the guests about this, which is just about death again. So like you mentioned you've never been in the room where someone passed away up before with Paula and stuff. And like, but, as a parent and as, like person, who's lived as you have in our age demographic, like we're, like middle-aged folks, if I may say so, it's like, we, our own end of life is, maybe what does that mean by definition? It's like that, like the end of life is at least as close as the beginning of life. You pivot to a point where most of your life has been lived. So do you think about that stuff? Like in, somebody as a teacher, as a parent, as a human, how do you feel about death? And, like, are you afraid of it? Is it something you don't really think about much? How do you grapple with this? The death of a beloved bunny or of yourself?
Right. Well, I honestly, I don't think I think about it too much, which I just recently had a conversation with a good friend about it, and she thought it was remarkable that I don't, because for her it's a huge topic, and also the kind of fear of dying. And right now, at least, it's not that much of an issue. I worked in hospitals for many, many years during my years as a student. And I think during that time, it was a lot more present for me because I saw a lot of people being very sick, and it was scary back then. But I think more about it in terms of what is it I still want to do with my life, knowing that it's not going to be forever, right? And what are the things I want to do while I still can? And I think that is a little bit more on my mind right now. Yeah.
That's good. I like that. Maybe that's like the like the strategy that should be recommended, is just like kind of don't think much about it and focus on what you're doing with your life right now and try to live the best life you can. I mean, I don't know. Do you see it? Would you go so far as to say you're in like a YOLO spirit, like you only live once, like carpe diem, like make the most of each day, or what does that look like for you, pivoting away from the negativity of death to, let's say, like the positivity of you have this time and you want to make it meaningful.
Right. I think it's a little bit of a, it's a balance between, and a good friend in the US once said that there's like the space where you dream and maybe sometimes also envision a different life for yourself, or different versions of your life, and yearn for certain things. And then at the same time, the balance is to also be immensely grateful for what you have right now, and be happy for and appreciative of the things that are at the moment for you. And so I think that's the balance I'm trying to strike, and be perhaps careful about the few dreams that you can realize within the things within the framework of your life. And I picked a very conservative job with being a Bavarian high school teacher, right? And so I try to balance this with a few things that I still want to do, and that that I think I really loved about living in the US, where I found people a lot more daring in their dreams and a little bit less tame than I think a lot of middle-class Germans are, especially in the Bavarian school system. And I have wonderful colleagues, and many of them do fantastic things, but it is a very secure job that attracts a certain personality type that is a secure person. And so I try to balance it with some of the dreams I want to realize for myself. And I think a big dream is having more animals. So that is, and living more, maybe more rural, and having space for different kind of creatures in my life.
Yes, indeed. Like who of, like, let's say other animals, who would be next on the list after the bunnies? Like, if, let's say, I mean, if your living circumstances allowed, whether in your current place or let's say you moved to like old McDonald's farm or
it would be goats.
Old Schmidt's farm. Yeah.
I think goats are high on the list, like the dwarf goats that are very, very cute and hopefully a dog.
And they don't have horns, as far as I believe, right? They're not
exactly.
Okay. Yeah.
So yeah, that's still something that hopefully I will be able to do one day, not too far away in the future. We'll see.
Yes. Yeah. Well, here's hoping for it. So, all right. Well, Eva, then let me ask you my final question, as usual. Do you have some recommendations for us? So, a book, a film, an album, mix and match. What would you recommend for those of us?
Well, not surprisingly, I would recommend the album Wild Animals from Trampled by Turtles, which is like a bluegrassy band. And the album is, I think, more than 10 years ago old, but I still really, really like it a lot. And so that would be my recommendation. And books, there are many, many fantastic books, of course. I think Margaret Atwood is my absolute favorite writer, and anything by Margaret Atwood. But also Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things, to me, is still the most beautiful book I think I've ever read. Very sad and heavy, but also beautiful poetry and a great narrative. And then, and I just read Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. It just came out last year, which is also a fantastic book. So.
Okay.
Nice. Oh, and film.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, please. Yeah. Fill out each category. Yeah, let's go for it.
I think my favorite film of last year is The Anatomy of a Fall, with the great Sandra Hüller, a German actress, and her story with her husband, who may or may not have fallen off the roof, or she pushed him, and then she's on trial, and the whole relationship unfolds, and all the sort of bitterness, but also love of a long-term relationship is on the table. And her child is in the audience, and it's really, and I think anyone who has been in a long-term relationship can relate to all the things she's saying there. And
okay. Yeah. Perfect. No, I might check that out tonight. So thanks very much.
Yeah.
Perfect. Well, thanks, Eva. It's been a pleasure talking with you. We'll have to talk again.
Absolutely. So, thank you, Dave.
Yeah. All right. Well, Eva, we'll see you sometime soon. Everybody else, we'll see you next week for the next episode of We hope you enjoyed this conversation with
Eva Hoffmann.
The Deadbeat Philosophy Podcast is a co-production of Deadbeat Media and the Museum Hegel-Haus Stuttgart. For more Deadbeat content and to chip in to keep the channel going, check us out at deadbeatphilosophy.substack.com. For more about the Museum Hegel-Haus, check out hegelhaus.de. That's HEGEL-HAUS.de. Adios and auf Wiedersehen.